February 20th, 1945, in the northern sector of Iwo Jima. From the narrow slit of his concrete bunker, Lieutenant Yamada watched the strange American tanks approach through the volcanic ash. He was not afraid. This position, 4 feet of steel-reinforced concrete, had withstood 74 consecutive days of American bombing. It was impregnable, but as the column drew closer, he saw something wrong.
The vehicles trailed black smoke, but not from damage. One tank's turret traversed toward a neighboring pillbox. Where its 75mm main gun should have been, there was something else. A modified barrel, a nozzle.
Then came the sound, a mechanical hiss like compressed air escaping. In the next instant, a torrent of burning fuel erupted across 150 yards of volcanic ash. It engulfed the neighboring pillbox in a storm of napalm-thickened death. The screams lasted only seconds. Yamada, his confidence shattered, fumbled for the field telephone. He had to report what he had just witnessed. 8 modified Sherman tanks, armed with flamethrowers, weapons the Japanese defenders had never encountered, and weapons that would transform the nature of combat in the Pacific War's most brutal battle. The architect of this island fortress was General Tadamichi Kuribayashi. Appointed to command in June 1944, Kuribayashi understood with crystalline clarity that he could not defeat the Americans. His mission was fundamentally different: make the capture of Iwo Jima so costly that the United States would reconsider invading the Japanese homeland. He had studied the failures at Saipan, Palelio, and the Philippines. Traditional Japanese defensive tactics, meeting the enemy at the water's edge, launching massive banzai charges, had proven catastrophically ineffective against American firepower. So, the general made a revolutionary decision, one that broke with centuries of samurai tradition. There would be no glorious charges, no warriors seeking honorable death in open combat. Instead, his 21,000 men would fight from underground, turning Iwo Jima into a subterranean killing field. This was not a simple defensive line. It was a subterranean fortress, an engineering marvel designed for one purpose: to bleed America white. By February 1945, Japanese engineers had completed 11 miles of interconnected tunnels, with plans for 17 in total. These were not shallow trenches. The completed sections reached 7 stories deep into the volcanic rock, linking thousands of caves and chambers. Above ground, 1,500 fortified positions dotted the landscape. These were concrete bunkers with walls 4 feet thick, reinforced with steel rods. But Kuribayashi's genius wasn't just in the construction, it was in the mathematics of death. Each position was carefully sited to provide interlocking fields of fire. Every inch of the island's surface could be swept by Japanese guns, most of which were hidden behind steel doors that opened only to fire, then sealed shut against retaliation. It was a fortress that defied conventional military doctrine. The Americans knew Iwo Jima would be difficult, but intelligence reports failed to grasp the true scope of Kuribayashi's underground fortress. Believing industrial might could solve any problem, they unleashed a staggering, overwhelming barrage. For 74 consecutive days, bombing runs dropped 6,800 tons of explosives on the 8-square-mile island. Naval bombardment then hurled another 22,000 shells onto Japanese positions. American planners, confident in this mathematics of destruction, expected resistance to be shattered. They projected the island would fall in 5 days. They were catastrophically wrong. The preliminary bombardment had destroyed less than 200 of the 1,500 fortified positions. The 11-mile tunnel system remained virtually intact. Most Japanese soldiers hadn't even been scratched by the massive firepower demonstration. Brute force had failed, and the Marines were about to walk into a killing field. The Marines landing on Iwo Jima were not without flamethrowers, but the ones they had were part of the problem, not the solution. The ordinary world of flamethrower technology was defined by crude, unreliable, and suicidal weapons. The most common was the Canadian Ronson system, but it was a maintenance nightmare. Its range was limited to just 60 to 80 yards, and its fuel capacity allowed only 30 to 40 seconds of total fire. In combat, failure rates exceeded 40%.
The Japanese had developed brutally effective anti-flamethrower tactics specifically to counter these weak weapons. The weapon's limited range meant the operator had to expose himself to enemy fire. Japanese machine gunners were instructed to concentrate fire on any soldier carrying the distinctive twin tanks. Snipers received extra ammunition just for targeting them. The result was a death sentence for the operators. In previous battles, portable flamethrower casualties had exceeded 70%, with some units suffering 92% losses. This wasn't a war-winning weapon, it was a desperate gamble that almost always failed. At Schofield Barracks, Hawaii, 5 months before the invasion, Colonel George F. Unmarked assembled a team that would revolutionize armored warfare in the Pacific. Unmarked, a career Army officer, commanded the U.S. Army Chemical Warfare Service's most secret project in the Central Pacific, CNPAC. His mission was stark and unambiguous: develop a weapon system capable of neutralizing the Japanese cave and bunker complexes that had proven immune to conventional weapons. The colonel's initial team was small, just the 43rd Chemical Laboratory Company. But Unmarked understood that this task required more than just chemical expertise. It required exceptional, hands-on talent. He requisitioned 25 men from the 117th Naval Construction Battalion, the Seabees, whose mechanical genius and practical engineering skills were already legendary throughout the Pacific. He then added personnel from the 5th Marine Tank Battalion and the 81st Ordnance Company, creating a unique joint service team united by a single, terrifying purpose: build a weapon that could burn the Japanese out of their caves. Leading this technical charge were 2 Seabees whose names would never appear in headlines: Machinist's Mate First Class A. Riker and Electrician's Mate Second Class Joseph Cly. These men were not desk-bound engineers following a distant command. They were veterans, bringing practical, bitter experience from previous island campaigns. They had personally seen Marines die by the dozen, cut down while trying to assault fortified positions that artillery and naval gunfire couldn't destroy. They understood the problem wasn't a lack of firepower, it was the inability to apply it against an enemy fighting from inside solid rock. This memory fueled an almost manic pace. Working 20-hour days in the grueling Hawaiian heat, the Seabees slept in shifts right beside their welding equipment. This wasn't just a job. It was a personal race to create something unprecedented, a weapon born from battlefield necessity. They weren't just modifying a tank, they were forging a solution, driven by the conviction that their innovation would save thousands of American lives. The resulting weapon, designated CBH-1, Construction Battalion Hawaii 1, was not an upgrade, it was a quantum leap in technology. The Seabees had created a monster. Its technical specifications were revolutionary. The system operated at 300 pounds per square inch of pressure, triple that of previous designs. This immense pressure, propelled by compressed nitrogen, gave it a maximum range of 150 yards with thickened fuel, nearly 3 times the distance of the portable flamethrowers. The fuel itself, a carefully calibrated napalm blend developed by the 43rd Chemical Laboratory, would burn at 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. The system could maintain this incinerating torrent for up to 80 seconds. But the true masterstroke, the innovation that would change everything, was where they put the weapon. Riker and Clay didn't just bolt a flamethrower onto a tank, they replaced the tank's main 75mm gun with the flame weapon. This single decision was the key. This integration was the tactical genius of the CBH-1. By replacing the main gun, the flamethrower was fully linked to the Sherman's existing fire control systems. The gunner used the same periscope, the same controls, and the same training. This meant a Marine could aim the 150-yard stream of liquid fire with the pinpoint accuracy of a conventional cannon. But the true innovation, the most important one, was psychological. The Seabees painted the modified tanks in standard Marine Corps olive drab. There were no special markings, no indication of their terrible purpose. This simple act of camouflage was a masterstroke. To the Japanese observers in their bunkers, they appeared to be just ordinary Sherman tanks, lining up for another conventional and likely failed assault. There was no way to identify the priority targets until the moment they opened fire. By then, as the Japanese were about to learn, it was far too late. On the morning of February 20th, D+1, the situation was desperate. The 21st Marine Regiment was pinned down, attempting to cross Motoyama Airfield No. 1. Their advance was completely stalled by 3 concrete pillboxes, whose interlocking machine gun fire had already decimated 2 rifle companies. Conventional tactics had failed. At 14:20 hours, Lieutenant Colonel William Duplantis made the call that would change the battle. He called for the flamethrower tanks. Tank number 431, commanded by Staff Sergeant Robert Meza, moved forward. To the Japanese observers, it was just another standard Sherman attempting the same failed assault. At 125 yards from the nearest pillbox, Meza gave the order: gunner, flamethrower, pillbox, fire. The CBH-1 erupted with a sound witnesses described as the devil's own blowtorch. A stream of napalm-thickened fuel arced through the air, striking the pillbox aperture with devastating accuracy. The effect was instantaneous and horrifying. The burning liquid flowed inside like lava, and the temperature inside the concrete structure soared past 1,200 degrees in seconds. The oxygen was consumed so rapidly that many Japanese soldiers suffocated before the flames even reached them. Sergeant Meza traversed the turret 30 degrees to engage the second pillbox, but this time, the defenders were ready. A Japanese 47mm anti-tank gun, perfectly concealed, fired point blank. The shell struck the Sherman's frontal armor with a deafening crack and ricocheted skyward, harmless. The 35-ton tank shuddered but continued its advance, its armor holding against the very weapon designed to destroy it. Gunner Thomas Carlson triggered another burst, maintaining fire for 15 seconds until black smoke billowed from the fortification. But the test wasn't over. As the tank crested a small rise, Japanese soldiers emerged from spider holes, rushing forward with satchel charges and magnetic mines. They swarmed the tank, desperately trying to reach its rear and its blind spots, where a conventional tank's guns couldn't depress or traverse. This was the moment the Seabees modification proved its genius. On a standard Sherman, this would be a crisis, forcing the bow gunner and infantry to defend the vehicle. But on the CBH-1, the full traverse capability allowed Carlson to swing the turret a full 180 degrees and fire directly behind the tank. The attacking infantry were consumed by a blazing wall that witnesses said looked like the gates of hell opening. The tank had faced its 2 greatest threats, anti-tank guns and suicide infantry, and had proven invincible. But as devastating as the physical destruction was, the psychological effect was even more profound. Japanese military doctrine was built on Bushido, the warrior's code. Soldiers were trained to die at their posts, to seek an honorable death in battle, and to never surrender. The flamethrower tanks made that ideology meaningless. This was not a glorious death facing bullets or bayonets. This was the primal, all-consuming terror of incineration. For the first time, significant numbers of Japanese soldiers began abandoning positions rather than face the flame. The ultimate proof came near the base of Mount Suribachi. Tank number 432, supporting the 26th Marines, approached a complex of interconnected caves. Commander Sergeant William Patterson, seeing Japanese soldiers watching from the darkness, ordered a short burst of flame into the air, a demonstration. The effect was immediate and unprecedented. Japanese soldiers began fleeing from the cave's rear exits, abandoning positions they had been ordered to defend to the death. Marine riflemen were so surprised they initially failed to fire. This represented the first mass abandonment of defensive positions in Japanese military history. Their spirit, their willingness to die, had been broken by the fear of fire. The Japanese were terrified, but they were not defeated. General Kuribayashi issued emergency orders designating the flame tanks as priority targets, and his men, though horrified, adapted. The hero of our story was about to face its ordeal. The test came on February 23rd, D+4, as the Marines assaulted Hill 382. This wasn't just another objective. It was the cornerstone of Kuribayashi's entire northern defense, a position honeycombed with tunnels 7 stories deep, designed by Japanese engineers to be impregnable. This time, the Japanese were ready.
As Tank 434 advanced through a storm of pre-registered artillery fire, its gunner, Corporal Michael Rodriguez, took aim at the main bunker complex. The flamethrower erupted, but the flame splashed harmlessly against sealed steel. Japanese engineers had adapted. They had installed heavy steel plates over the bunker apertures, which their crews sealed shut between machine gun bursts. The weapon that had seemed unstoppable, the solution to the entire battle, was suddenly useless. The flame that had broken the Japanese spirit now splashed impotently against a simple sheet of steel. For a moment, it seemed the invincible weapon had been countered. Inside Tank 434, Gunner Corporal Michael Rodriguez kept his eye pressed to the periscope, his frustration mounting. The flame was useless, but then, through the smoke, he made a critical observation. The steel plate wasn't just deflecting the fire, it was absorbing the 1500-degree heat. It was glowing a dull, then a bright, cherry red. Rodriguez understood basic metallurgy. Metal that hot couldn't maintain its integrity. It would warp. He kept his thumb on the trigger, maintaining fire for a continuous 45 seconds, far longer than doctrine recommended, dangerously depleting the tank's precious fuel reserves. The crew inside the tank felt the heat, the strain on the engine. And then they saw it. The steel plate buckled. The incendiary mixture, no longer held back, poured through the warped gaps. The bunker's interior instantly became an inferno. The effect was catastrophic. Ammunition began to cook off in violent, explosive chains. The concrete itself cracked from the thermal shock. As the bunker tore itself apart, the secondary explosions revealed the carefully concealed tunnel entrances Japanese engineers had hidden. The technology hadn't failed. It just needed a human element, a gunner's quick-thinking adaptation, to breach the impregnable position. By early March, the battle had shifted to Iwo Jima's northern plateau, a hellscape of twisted ravines and volcanic rock that Marines called the meat grinder. Here, General Kuribayashi had positioned his final defenses, precisely because the terrain made tank operations nearly impossible. But the flame tanks and their crews adapted again. On March 8th, Tank number 436 achieved what crews would later call the impossible shot. It was supporting the 9th Marines' assault on Cushman's Pocket, a complex of caves and bunkers built into a near-vertical cliff face immune to direct fire. The tank's commander, Sergeant Daniel Foster, made a desperate calculation. The flamethrower's maximum 35-degree elevation wasn't enough, but if he could tilt the entire tank, he might arc the flame over the cliff edge. He ordered his driver onto a pile of rubble from a naval bombardment, tilting the 35-ton vehicle precariously backward. As enemy mortar mounds fell around them, Gunner Corporal Anthony Vitelli triggered the flamethrower. The molten napalm arced high into the air, seemed to hang for a moment at its apex, then cascaded down into the Japanese positions. The psychological impact was devastating. Japanese soldiers who had believed their elevated positions were completely immune to flamethrower attack were suddenly engulfed in an inferno from above. Witnesses reported soldiers leaping from the cliffs, choosing death by falling over the horror of death by fire. When Iwo Jima was finally declared secure on March 26, 1945, the mathematics of the battle had been completely rewritten by fire. The final statistics were staggering, and they revealed the true, almost unbelievable impact of the Seabees' secret weapon. In 36 days of combat, the small contingent of flamethrower tanks had consumed 360,000 gallons of fuel mixture. In exchange, post-action analysis credited them with what conventional arms could not achieve. They had systematically destroyed over 1,000 fortified positions. Most significantly, military analysts calculated that the flame tanks had reduced American casualties by an estimated 5,000 men, a stunning return on investment for just 8 initial vehicles. The data on the Japanese side was just as stark. Over 30% of all Japanese casualties on the island were attributed to flame weapons, both tank-mounted and portable. But the most profound statistic was psychological, not physical. Only 216 Japanese defenders survived as prisoners of war. This was a tiny fraction of the 21,000-man garrison, but it was still more than the combined prisoner totals from the bloody battles of Tarawa, Saipan, and Peleliu. When interrogated, many of these survivors specifically cited fear of burning alive as their reason for surrendering. The tanks had not just killed, they had broken an enemy's fanatical, centuries-old will to die.
The hero's journey was complete, and its elixir would permanently change the ordinary world of American warfare. The success at Iwo Jima wasn't just a tactical victory, it triggered an immediate strategic revolution. The Marine Corps immediately requested 54 additional flamethrower tanks for future operations. Back at Schofield Barracks, Colonel Unmarked's team went from a top-secret project to overdrive production. Their innovation was suddenly assigned a AAA priority level, the same category of national importance as the B-29 Superfortress and the Manhattan Project.
The Army, observing the Marines' stunning success, accelerated its own program. The entire 713th Tank Battalion was converted to flame tanks for the upcoming invasion of Okinawa. The weapon that had been a last-minute improvisation, born from the 20-hour days of a few Seabees in a Hawaiian warehouse, had now fundamentally and permanently changed American assault doctrine. The final verdict on the weapon's effectiveness came not from American after-action reports, but from the enemy who had faced it. General Kuribayashi, in his final, desperate report to Imperial Headquarters on March 17th, recognized the strategic implication. He wrote, "The enemy's special flame tanks have proven more effective than all their artillery and aerial bombardment combined. The Americans have not just superior numbers, but superior imagination." That superior imagination was what had broken his men.
Lieutenant Yamada, the officer who had witnessed that first attack on February 20th, survived the battle as one of the 216 prisoners. In post-war testimony, he explained the psychological collapse that no military doctrine could prevent. "We had prepared for every form of death," he said. "Bullets, shells, bayonets, starvation. We had not prepared for burning petroleum that sought us out in our deepest bunkers." It wasn't the death, it was the method of death. It negated their courage, their fanaticism, and their engineering. "The flame tanks broke our spirit in ways no conventional weapon could," Yamada concluded. "They turned our greatest strength, our underground fortifications, into our tombs." But this technological victory came with a profound human cost, one borne by the crews themselves. Many struggled with what would later be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder. They were haunted by the memory of human beings turned to ash, of screams cut short by consuming flame. Sergeant Robert Meza, the commander of Tank 431, never spoke of his service until shortly before his death in 1993. He told his grandson, "Nobody should be proud of burning men alive, but those tanks saved a lot of Marine lives. That's what I try to remember." This sentiment, this terrible calculus of war, was echoed by the highest levels of command. General Holland Smith, commander of the entire invasion force, wrote the final epitaph for the weapon. "The flamethrower tanks," he stated in his memoir, "were the difference between victory and catastrophe. Without them, we would have paid an unbearable price for every yard of that cursed island. They were horrible weapons, but war is horrible business. In the end, they saved more lives than any other weapon we employed."